because finally music is necessary as a point of recovery and as a point of moving forward, as a point of picking up the pieces, as a point of taking, again, something that's usually hidden and giving it a form and allowing it to go with us into the day and come out of the night. George Crumb, as Richard Tognetti was saying, is really one of the great composers of night music and your night thoughts. And what are the things you think and understand and realize at 3 a.m. that are really difficult to face in daylight? And make those things that are in your dreams actually true also during the day. And make those haunted memories actually face them in daylight and take the appropriate action. And that, I think, is, to talk about the private place, it also is where the private place becomes a public place. And one of the things that music does is create a public space out of our private selves. That is to say, in politics, it ends up being everybody sharing the worst part of themselves and creating some fake public conversation. And in the arts, it's everyone sharing the best part of themselves, which is that private place of your finest and deepest feelings. And allowing 600 people to also be there with you in that most private place, where we are at our finest, or where we're at our most wounded and therefore our most sensitive, instead of insensitive. But exactly the place where the sensitivity is great and deep, because it was hard won. And if I could just say, I spent a lot of this year in Chicago working on Handel's Hercules with veterans. In the city of Chicago, as you probably know, 1/3 of the homeless population are veterans. So we were in a lot of homeless shelters, and dealing with post-traumatic stress, which is not a syndrome, it's a reality. It's a reality that people have difficulty diagnosing or describing. The only thing you know is that someone is actually suffering. You can tell they're suffering. But how else you can speak about it, you don't know. And what was astonishing for so many of the veterans and the veterans organizations, and for the pathologists who are trying to diagnose them and treat them, is that Handel's music created the opening that none of the other programs could create, and actually created the spaciousness within the lives of these suffering people where they could recognize and live with their own suffering, but more spaciously. That what was their own private trauma finally had a public place where it could be acknowledged by other people, and it's not just that I'm crazy, not that I'm losing my mind, not that I'm incapacitated, not that I'm turning into a vegetable and a dysfunctional, angry person, but this music is creating a larger space where everything that's haunting me, other people can experience and recognize and finally share. And I think one of the main reasons we're on Earth is to find ways of profoundly sharing each other's pain, so that one person isn't carrying all that themselves, but that people around help carry it, which is why we form communities and why most of these issues cannot be dealt with by individuals. They need to be dealt with by communities. And what music does, whether it's Bob Dylan's Blowin' in the Wind and the entire, Pete Seeger and the folk music movement that was crucial to bringing down the Vietnam War, because the music created a public space out of people's deepest private morality. And suddenly that private morality had a public voice and could sing and be resilient through images and metaphors in ways that moved against the propaganda sheets, against the statistics, against the apparatus that keeps defending war as inevitable and the only necessary solution. And also the kind of rationalizations, because one of the things that the arts can do is go to the profoundly irrational place where all this actually is coming from. And what we need to do is not just deal with our rational selves, but deal with our irrational selves. And
as this piece does.
Yeah, and the arts can go in very deeply to those places that otherwise are quite inaccessible. And so for me, the dimension of the private thing, Ara, is in what way are we as human beings capable of sharing the most difficult parts of our lives, as well as the joy, the ecstasy, the hope, the beauty, the breakthrough, the imagination of something that we have not yet lived to see. How do we share those things without falsifying them? How do we share those things in a way that they have not lost any of the essence that they have in our deepest thoughts and feelings? And that is where you get into good art and bad art, and where you get into, but where literally it has to be really skillful, and the standards are really high because the stakes are so high.
You're making me realize an image, or recall an image that was just brought to mind by Ara's question, but now very much by that discussion of yours just now. The greatest artist I ever knew was a wonderful poet and writer named Czesław Miłosz, who, through a strange concatenation of circumstances, became my landlord. I would rent his house up on Grizzly Peak in Berkeley, this spectacular house, which is described in a number of his books. When he was in Krakow, and I'd go to New York, and he'd come back from Krakow, and it's his 100th birthday. Actually, the 30th of June. I bought the house after he died 7 years ago now. But he has a wonderful, Miłosz, in his book Year of the Hunter, which is largely about this place, describes this thing that's happened to me, and I bet it's happened to many other people in this hall. He says, does it ever happen to you when you walk into a gallery or a museum and you look down several galleries down and you see this painting on the wall, and you can't see what's in the painting, you can't see what the subject is, you can't see what the details are, you can't even see if it's figurative or anything else, but you know it's a Veronese, or you know it's a Tintoretto or a Titian or whatever. You know the artist, but you can't see the picture. How is that possible? And I remember reading that and thought, God, he's right. I've had that happen a lot. Well, he continues, you recognize it because you recognize that artist's spirit. You recognize the spirit. In some way, what art is about is the embodiment of spirit. Now, we all have a spirit, every one of us, whether we're artists or not. And what separates the artist from others is that he or she has the way, whether through music, painting, poetry, to embody that spirit. And that's a lucky thing for that person, but it's lucky for everybody else as well who don't, for whatever reason, and partly because they're doing science or business or whatever else they're spending their lives happily doing. They're not in the business of embodying spirit. So these are the people among us who, for whatever reason, those of compulsion, talent, endowment, grace, the gift of the gods, or the curse of the gods, whatever your particular choice is, have this power of embodiment. And we rely on them, to get back to Ara's original provocative question, to communicate, because they have the power to do it, that. And when we listen to Night Thoughts and we listen to George Crumb's piece, we're benefiting from this power of embodiment that came to him for who knows whatever reason, but is the essence of a kind of communication that is a gift from...
Peter, you always prompt dislodge memories and sensibilities that I haven't thought about in a long time and connect them in unexpected ways. You just reminded me of something else, which was an incredibly powerful experience I had at the Juilliard School, where I spent my days and many nights. One of our recent graduates, whose name is Adam Driver, is a Marine Corps veteran. Was a drama student, he graduated. And Adam was as atypical a drama student as you could possibly find. He'd come to Juilliard in his late 20s, not at 18, full of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed hopes of Broadway or Hollywood stardom. And I think it took tremendous courage for him to audition as an actor and come to Juilliard. And I wasn't there when he began, I was there when he graduated. I went to work there while Adam was a student. But I'm told by my colleagues that the first couple of years were really hard, and he thought about leaving quite often. And just to give you a little sense, Adam kept, to this day when I see him, he calls me sir, and I want to say, Adam, I'm the dean, I'm not the general. And I can't get him to call me by my first name, he calls me sir.
General Ara.
Adam connected his worlds, and in one of the more remarkable moments, we had a reading of Sophocles to which Iraq and Afghanistan veterans were invited, and in a remarkable moment of enlightenment on the part of the US military, a very large class in uniform from West Point, which is just up the river from New York City. And the point was made, and his name escapes me, but there's a very gifted psychiatrist who has written an eloquent book about it. He's
Jonathan.
David Grossman, are you talking about? On Killing?
The fellow, MacArthur fellow with the two of you, and I'm just blanking on his name. About Sophocles and war. Sophocles, Adam reminded us that Sophocles was a soldier. And
A general.
A general, exactly.
And as we were reminded, generals were elected, and he was elected twice general, so he was a very good soldier. And the audience consisted of citizens, males, who were veterans. It was a soldier writing plays for veterans. And one of the large chunks that was read was Ajax of Sophocles, with Juilliard actors and Adam as one of the ringleaders. There is a soldier gone insane, a brilliant and much admired soldier who massacres sheep in a very horrifying scene. And the Department of Defense has now begun to invite actors to, in exactly the way you talked about with Hercules, to work with soldiers, because they, it was very funny. It was no longer highfalutin theater or do-good action. It was Sophocles the soldier talking to fellow soldiers, and it wasn't called post-traumatic syndrome in ancient Greece, but it was addressing the head on. But the other interesting thing about Adam is that, again, think of this extremely straight-laced successful in however you want to define it, who calls anybody in authority sir. He just was in the revival of Angels in America in New York, and was spellbinding, playing the role of a gay man suffering from AIDS, which is as far removed from Adam's experience, but there was this strange link of his experience as a soldier suddenly informed his empathy and ability to play a dying gay man with a level of empathy and understanding that most actors can't bring to it. So there are these intersections of the sort we've been talking about since Sophocles was practicing his craft, and if not long before.
Certainly, post-traumatic stress appears repeatedly, not just in Sophocles, but in Aeschylus. And I was thinking when you were talking earlier about the treatment, you were talking about the telling of war, and of course the great, at the beginning of our culture, certainly the great monument is the Iliad. And I've always been haunted by the scene in which Achilles, having come back to the fight, is about to kill someone who pleads for his life, who says, here I am, my family will pay a great ransom, I'm disarmed, don't kill me, spare me. And Achilles says, why are you weeping? Why are you wailing? Can't you see how great and beautiful I am? Won't it be an honor to die at my hands? Why would I spare you? And the terrible reality is, if you read this, if you know anything of war, you completely understand this, even though in our terms an atrocity is about to be committed. And if you go to West Point, you will read the Iliad, and they study not only the Iliad, but of course Thucydides, Herodotus. You can't get through West Point without studying these classics. And as Peter knows well, the attitudes that he was exploring in Hercules, if you go back a generation to Aeschylus, the attitudes about war were very different, very different. You have to go to the weepy Euripides to actually find the kind of pity that we're talking about. Sorry, this is Nietzsche's view of things.
Well, yeah, that's a little crude, but if I could just thank everyone for coming to Ojai this summer, I would like to just emphasize, for me, we're at a time where the state of the country is so extreme. The Civil War, everyone in America knew there was a Civil War on and knew what it was being fought for. We have no idea there's even a war going on now, or as Marx says, 3, what they're being fought for, what it means, how our lives are being touched, not just physically, but morally and spiritually. What is the pollution, and how do we cleanse? And what do we all do, each of us, every day? And I do believe that everything we do should be useful and should combine with some action that is positive and is an action of renewal, which is why I'd like to think that this subject matter is best treated through music and art, because while it's very painful, the music itself is renewing, and the moral cleansing is renewing. And I do think that's why people should gather for music festivals outdoors under the stars and just have a communal space where we all think about these things together and we all feel our way through them together and arrive at another type of understanding that doesn't have to be hijacked by this or that political party and has nothing to do with this or that policy, but just simply has to recognize the toll things are taking right now and address those things for the deep toll that is really going on, not the surface stuff and not the economy or the way in which all these things are presented to us all the time, and not even about assisting the Arab Spring, which the courage of people who are dying day after day in Syria and going out 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 and facing those guns and those tanks unarmed. The courage of people right now and what they're willing to give for their own freedom and for their self-liberation is overwhelming and is a lesson to all of us. And one can only step back and admire the courage. And then the question is, where is the same courage in our own lives about our own issues, about our own country, and our own questions? And I do think one of the things that music offers, and what Ojai has specialized in, particularly contemporary music, but I think music was always contemporary at some point, is the ability to ask a difficult question, but the reason you have the right to ask it is you're putting yourself through difficult things. And I just want to emphasize tonight, I think George Crumb has invited the percussionists to a task that is so difficult, so demanding of concentration, of courage, of working together, of listening to each other, of hair trigger response in a concerted way. And Don Upshaw is just a personal example of courage, of an artist going out there with such courage as an image of what we are all capable of, and the way in which each one of us underestimates ourselves and the power of our own voices and our own actions. And I hope tonight is very, very inspiring from that point of view. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.